So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for participating in this particular Center for Spiritual Living, Tucson. We do this because we all appear and we all participate. And I appreciate every one of you who chooses to spend time with us on Sunday morning, so you can hear the band probably, but that's okay. Or by watching recorded talks later. We we have had to learn a new way to be in the last 6 months, and it kind of works. So this month we're looking at the idea that abundant good is always present, and we're always surrounded by it and immersed in it, whether we see it or not, whether we like it or not, whether we can imagine it or not. So I want you to take a second and think about your last week. Have you felt like you were immersed and enfolded in abundant good? Or was it more like being in a washing machine? When my sister and I were talking this morning, the conversation starts, how you going? How was your week? And it's like, well, I had one. I don't really remember, but I'm sure there was something. Because life is so interesting right now, and we have to really pay attention and think about how we want to present for ourselves what our world looks like. So I want to talk about the washing machine thing for a minute. And I think I've told this story before, but I'm not really sure, so whatever. A bunch of years ago, I was on a multi-day whitewater rafting trip with a couple of friends on a portion of the Snake River, which runs more or less between Washington State and Oregon on the west and Idaho on the east. And for this particular trip, which was awesome, the guests, which was me and my friends, didn't have to paddle. We could just hold on. The river was too tricky for novices to handle the paddles. So we just were supposed to not fall out. And on this one particular rapid, called the Granite Bedroom just for fun, our raft flipped. And it was kind of like what I thought it would be like if I was smashed around in a washing machine. And because we were wearing life vests, we all bobbed to the surface and grabbed onto the rope like we were supposed to. And when the person in charge of the raft, who was frantically looking for all of us novices, found me, she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Well, yeah, that was cool." And then she muttered, "Adrenaline junkie," and she went off to make sure my friends were safe. So is life like a washing machine? Or is life something that you see and you choose to move through? It's a question we get to ask ourselves over and over and over again. And this doesn't mean we pretend like it's wonderful all the time, because initially, at least, it doesn't look like it's wonderful. But we do always have the option of deciding how we see what shows up. If we can see the events of our lives as being for our good, somehow serving our awakening, serving our enlightenment, giving us an opportunity to see some bigger truth at play, we can do that. Alternatively, we can live in the washing machine and feel trapped or victimized by life, and we have a choice. So, and it's a choice that we get to practice over and over and over again. So yesterday in the daily meditation, we were reading a reading from Dr. Daniel Lee Morgan from his 365 days daily readings from a book called Guidance for a Spiritual Journey. He was the founder and senior minister for the Guidance Church of Religious Science in Greater Los Angeles for almost 40 years. The reading began like this: "Truth may certainly be true, whatever my opinion may be, but it has no authority with me until I perceive it to be true. It is impossible to give consciousness to anyone. All that can be done is to put them in a position where they can develop in consciousness. Motivation is the first necessity for this. We must wish to grow, and we must wish to develop. We must be curious, eager, and we must be intentional. He goes on, divine mind is infinite. Within it are infinite resources, infinite life, infinite love, infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite substance. The only question, how much of these things can you appropriate for your use? The supply is inexhaustible. The only limit lies within yourself. So why don't we accept and receive as much as we want from this infinite storehouse? Or why do we judge ourselves or others who take more than they need? And who decides anyway how much somebody needs? And what's underneath that thought? One thing that could be underneath that thought is that we don't believe we're worthy, or we don't believe there's good enough to go around, or we think we're greedy if we take. And we can think the same things about others. Does it make it true? What keeps us from accepting, receiving, and letting ourselves have every bit of the good that is available to us? Before I move on to a couple more stories, I want you to think about a belief that's fairly prevalent in American culture right now. Is the act of receiving an active or a passive act? We talk about letting other people help us as being open to receive. Even that is hard sometimes in our culture of I'd rather do it myself because that way I know it's done right. It's so complicated. And it was a trick question because the answer is it can be both. We can let people help us. We can let people take care of us, do things for us. And we can also be active receivers for our own good. In Derek Rydell's book, Emergence, there's a chapter called Waiting on the Law. We're talking about this book on Wednesday night, like Maria said. He wrote, waiting is part of the perfect process. I don't mean waiting in the passive sense, like sitting around watching paint dry. On the path of emergence, waiting is an active experience that requires courage and strength of character. Waiting has different levels. On one level, it is stopping and doing nothing, while everything in us wants to do something, anything, to make sure we get what we need. Yeah, well, this takes increased faith and inner resolve to wait, to stop and do nothing. On another level, waiting is having an inner stillness and receptivity to what's unfolding. On the surface of our daily life, we appear to be doing nothing or very little, but inside us, we are developing the soul sense to be able to see and hear and receive the guidance and nourishment we truly need to thrive in the long term. So that's one angle of what receptivity could look like. I love this book by Derek Rydell because his imagery that he uses is of an acorn, which contains within it every single thing that the oak tree needs. But you look at it and it's just this little hard lump that you step on and it cracks under your feet. But if it's not cracked, if it's left, if it's planted, if it has a chance to grow, it already contains everything it needs. It is an oak in idea, in thought, and it becomes an oak in form as it grows. Raymond Hollowell, the book that the Prosperity Plus folks are looking at this month and next, or this month and last, wrote about a more active version of receptivity in his chapter, The Law of Receiving. It's a story from the Hebrew scriptures. It's not found in the Christian Bible, but it's in the Hebrew scriptures. It was a time of very extreme drought in the desert. We know this one, right? There wasn't enough water for the animals or people. Thankfully, that part's not true for us. 3 leaders came to Elijah and asked him to pray for rain. Elijah said he'd work on it, and he told the people to go, he told the leaders to have the people go dig trenches in the sand so that the rain that would come would have some place to collect. So they did. They went down from the mountain and they went and they told their people, said, look, Elijah said it's going to rain, so dig ditches. And the people did. And you know what it's like here when the skies are blue. There's not a cloud for 100 miles. What if we did that? What if we dug the trenches? What if the clouds gathered and the rains came? In the stories, the ditches were full of rainwater and both the people and the animals were satisfied. Can you imagine how you would react on a hot blue sky day in this desert, our desert, if somebody told you to dig ditches in the sand to collect the rainwater that was coming? Hollowell wrote, Elijah, knowing the law, instructed them to prepare and made the way easy for them to receive. The key to the law then is this: we are continually drawing into life what we give and what we expect. They dug the ditches. The rains came. Whether we attract good or bad, it is governed by the same principle. That's a tough one, right? Well, it is if we think it is. So, a personal story. Last night, as I was cooking supper, I was fretting and I was worrying and I was grumpy and it wasn't good. I was having a pity party in my kitchen, in my head, and I didn't even know I was doing it. And it wasn't a big pity party. It was just a little bitty pity party, but I was doing it, thinking about all the things that weren't working out the way I wanted them to. And because I was in this space of life sucks, I cut my finger with my scissors. Do you know how hard it is to cut your finger with your scissors? And was bad enough I needed to put a Band-Aid on it. I certainly wasn't thinking about hurting myself with scissors. But the tendency of my thought and the expectancy of my thought was life sucks, which is not in alignment with my highest good. Sometimes life works really fast. It's better today, but I still have a Band-Aid on it just to keep me from bumping it on something. We do this. We don't call, cutting yourself in the finger with scissors in, but if we call in, my life sucks, I'm having a terrible day, then I'm going to have a terrible day because the law has to give us what we say. Man. So Dr. Holmes, in The Science of Mind on 282, wrote, the way to proceed is to begin right where we are. It's not scientific to begin anyplace else. That always makes me laugh. One who understands the systematic use of law will understand that he is where he is because of what he is. But he will not say, I have to stay here because that's what I am. Instead, he will begin to, here's a word we don't use anymore, disclaim what he appears to be. All his statements release wrong subjective tendencies and provide in their place a correct concept of life and of reality. When he does this, he will automatically be lifted out of his condition, impelling forces sweeping everything before them, and will set him free if he trusts in spirit and the working of the law. So This is the place I need to mention probably the most famous declaration by Emma Curtis Hopkins. She's one of Holmes's teachers that we'll be reading in The Roots of Science of Mind when it starts in January. She wrote it again and again and again and had taught it to hundreds and thousands of people. And it's an interesting one to try on and see how it fits. There is good for me and I ought to have it. Pay attention to what your brain does when you say those words. There is good for me and I ought to have it. How open do you think she was to receiving her good? Do you think she was passively standing by, or do you think she was actively engaged in whatever she felt like she was called or led to do? So in last week's Prosperity Plus 3 class, Matt Boggs told a story, and it's worth recapping here. I had forgotten how funny it was to hear him tell it, but it's 20 minutes long, so I'm just going to give you the short version. He said he was finishing high school only because he really wanted to play college football, and you couldn't be a high school dropout and play football in college. He and his folks went to see a recruiter, and the recruiter looked at his stats and said, yeah, well, kids like you are a dime a dozen and you're nothing special, and not to waste anybody's time because you weren't going to make it on a college team. Well, Matt didn't take this no for an answer. He took it on as a challenge and proceeded to work on his technique and his skills and his speed. And he walked onto a college football team as a freshman. The problem was, as a freshman, his job was to warm the bench. The cultural and historical conditioning, the beliefs, what everybody knows of that school said freshmen were never listened to. Freshmen were never given any time on the field during games. They had to wait their turn. But he really, really wanted it. So he worked hard in all the practices, day after day after day. And because he was a freshman and he knew what the rules were about freshmen, nothing changed. And then his older brothers called and said they were coming to see a game and they were excited and they wanted to watch him play. So he redoubled his efforts in practice, and still nothing changed. He was third string on the kickoff team, which meant there were two guys ahead of him, in between him and his dream of playing on the field during a real game. He told his brothers that since he was a freshman and his job was to warm the bench, they were really unlikely to see him play. They decided it would be quite okay if they got to see him suited up in his full football uniform. But they knew, he knew, and they knew, and he knew that they really wanted to see him play, and he wanted it too, badly. So the kickoff team, the first string kickoff team, really screwed up a couple of games. The coach got more and more livid. After a couple horrible plays, and the coach is about to blow a gasket, Matt, who is so psyched and so full of adrenaline, he could just about explode, tells the coach that he can do it. He can get out there and he can deliver. The coach, whatever, incredulous at this upstart freshman who had the nerve and gall to speak up, decides what harm is it? Let him play. And then Matt got really afraid of what he had just created for himself and the claim that he had made. But he kept his wits about him and he performed well on the field. And after that game, he became a starter for the kickoff team for the rest of the year. It doesn't matter how many roadblocks we put in front of ourselves or other people put in front of us. If we believe and are willing to do the interior work and the exterior work that's required for our dream to come to pass, we receive that dream. It's not a typical way that we think about receiving, is it? We have to be willing to be open to receive our good and doing whatever it takes. And we have to believe that we can have it. We have to be willing to put out the mental energy and sometimes physical energy before our heart's desire will transform. So I want to close with a parable that I've read before. It's from Danaan and Parry from a book called Warriors of the Heart. I've read it before. It's just so magnificent. I'll put it in the newsletter so you can read it again for yourself. Sometimes I feel like my life is a series of trapeze swings. I'm either hanging onto the bar, swinging along, or for a few minutes in my life, I'm hurtling across space between the trapeze bars. Most of the time, I spend my life hanging on for dear life to my trapeze bar of the moment. It carries me along at a certain steady rate of swing, and I have a feeling I'm in control of my life. I know most of the right questions and some of the answers. But every once in a while I'm merrily or even not so merrily swinging along, I'll look out ahead of me into the distance, and what do I see? I see another trapeze bar swinging towards me. It's empty, and I know, in the place of me that knows, that this new trapeze bar has my name on it. It's the next step in my growth, my aliveness coming to get me. In my heart of hearts, I know that for me to grow, I must release my grip on the present, well-known bar and move to this new one. Each time this happens to me, I hope, no, I pray that I won't have to let go of my old bar completely before I grab the new one. But in my knowing place, I know that I must totally release my grasp on my old bar, and for some moment in time, I must hurtle across space before I can grab onto the new bar. Each time I am filled with terror. It doesn't matter that in all my previous hurdles across the void of unknowing, I have always made it. I am each time afraid I will miss, and I will be crushed on the unseen rocks at the bottomless chasm between the bars. I do it anyway. Perhaps this is what the essence of what the mystics call the faith experience. No guarantees, no net, no insurance policy. But you do it anyway, because somehow to keep hanging on to that old bar is no longer on the list of alternatives. So for an eternity that can last a microsecond or 1,000 lifetimes, I soar across the dark void of the past is gone and the future is not yet here. It's called transition. I have come to believe that this transition is the only place where real change occurs. And I mean real change, not the pseudo kind that only lasts until next time my old buttons get pushed. I have noticed in our culture, this transition zone is looked upon as a no thing, a no place in between places. Sure, the old trapeze bar was real, and the new one coming towards me too. Well, I hope that's real. But the void in between, that's just scary and confusing and disorienting. A nowhere that must be gotten through as fast and unconsciously as possible. What a wasted opportunity that would be. I have a sneaky suspicion that the transition zone is the only real thing, and the bars are the illusions we dream up to avoid the void where real change, real growth occurs for us. Whether or not my hunch is true, it remains that the transition zones of our lives are incredibly rich places. They should be honored and savored. Yes, with all the pain and the fear and the feelings of being out of control that can, but don't necessarily accompany transitions, they are still the most alive, most growth filled, passionate, expansive moments of our lives. So consider what it takes to receive your good. Consider what you have to let in. Consider what you have to let go of. And allow this good that you desire to become real for you. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I'm going to roll straight into the prayer. So if something has popped up to the front of your mind that you wish to claim, you wish to own as part of your present reality, put it in the forefront of your mind. Let it rise in your heart. Let it become something that you actually are willing to consider the possibility of experiencing. While I speak the words, I breathe into this grand space. I breathe into the space between the trapeze bars where change happens, where I'm open to receiving good, which has my name on it, which is already headed my way, which is something I imagined but never fathomed could actually come true. And now I open my mind and I allow the possibility. I let go of the old thoughts I have about how small life is and how constrained and limited and restrictive and all the I can'ts or shouldn'ts or not allowed to's or how dare I. I let go of all those things and I step into this new day, this new idea, and I receive that good. And as I know this truth for myself, I also know it for every other being. Each one receives the good they allow. So I breathe into that space and I receive ever more good. And I don't stop. I keep moving because in that movement, life continues to happen. And I choose to use life to promote greater good for myself and for all. Greater life, greater abundance, greater harmony, greater peace, greater ease. That is my birthright and the birthright of each and every one. And we have to let go of our small ideas about ourselves in order to step into that great good. So I do my part to release myself from my own small ideas. And I feel so grateful to be able to have this practice, to be able to have this awareness and to step into this ever greater good. Life is fabulous when we see it that way. And I choose to see it that way. I feel blessed to be able to be part of this center, this group of beloveds, and to celebrate life. I know it's true, I let it be, and so it is.